Okay, we're live. Hi, Jay Bowman. How are you today? Oh, I didn't notice, Jay Bowman, that you had a ton of replies. I know somebody replied to me that I can pay for their all their children then. It's like, it's not even about that, you know? Just let it go. So I'll just wait a couple seconds, see if more people come in. I have trouble seeing from StreamYard how many people are in the live stream or watching. I used to be able to, but I can't figure it out now. So, oh, I think there's 3. Oh, it's right in front of my face. Okay. No, thanks, Jay Bowman. Your comment was perfectly fine, and I feel the same. So, hi, Danny, the Magic Junk Drawer. How are you today? Thank God it's Friday, everyone. So, it's awesome. Been a long week, I think. How about you guys? Okay. I'm doing well. Thank you, Danny. And yeah, Jay Bowman. Yes, it was a long week, you know. Yes, ready for the weekend. Me too. So I'm not sure whether I should start. There's like 5 people. I don't know. Maybe I should get started and they can watch on the replay just to keep it on time. So I'll start now. So before we get into Lindsay Clancy, I want to start with something that sounds simple, but really isn't. People can speak the same language and still misunderstand each other. 2 people can use the exact same word or phrase and mean very different things by it. And we see that sometimes hilariously with regional expressions, generational differences, professional jargon, and especially with words that have both an everyday meaning and a more specific clinical meaning. And that brings me to 2 words Lindsay Clancy used repeatedly when speaking with her psychiatric providers. Intrusive thoughts. That comes up repeatedly in the trial. After listening closely to the testimony of one of those providers, psychiatric nurse practitioner Rebecca Jollotta, I started wondering, because I do that with words. It's like, I started wondering, when Lindsay said intrusive thoughts, did Lindsay and her provider actually mean the same thing? Oh, thank you, Danny the Magician, for the 2 jewels. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And so, let me get back. I lose my screen then. Sorry, guys. Okay. If you're new here, my name is Stina, and this is Motive and Method. I have a bachelor's degree in communication and more than 25 years of professional experience working with language and communication. So that is the lens I bring to these cases: how people use words, how those words are interpreted, and sometimes how meaning can get lost between them. For anyone who may be new to the Lindsay Clancy case, let me give you just a little background before we get into tonight's discussion. Lindsay Clancy was a labor and delivery nurse living in Duxbury, Massachusetts, with her husband, Patrick, and their 3 young children, 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. On January 24th, 2023, Patrick left the house to pick up medication for one of the children and take out for dinner. When he returned, he found Lindsay seriously injured outside the home after she had apparently jumped from a 2nd-story window. Their 3 children were found unresponsive in the basement. Cora and Dawson passed away that night, and Callan died several days later. Lindsay was ultimately charged with 3 counts of murder and has pleaded not guilty. And from almost the beginning, there have been 2 very different ways of looking at what happened. The prosecution's position is that Lindsay knew what she was doing and acted deliberately. Her defense argues that she was suffering from severe mental illness, including postpartum psychosis, and was not criminally responsible for her actions. And that distinction is important tonight because we're going to look at something that happened before January 24th, when Lindsay was actively seeking mental health treatment and repeatedly reporting what she called intrusive thoughts. The question I want to examine is very specific. When Lindsay said intrusive thoughts, what did she mean? And what did the people treating her understand those words to mean? I am not a doctor, psychiatrist, or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I'm not diagnosing Lindsay Clancy or anyone else for that matter. What I did was research how terms like intrusive thoughts, auditory hallucinations, voices, and psychosis are generally understood clinically. And then I went back and listened to the testimony again. And that raised some interesting possibilities. I wondered, maybe Lindsay was using the phrase intrusive thoughts exactly as her providers understood it, as what I assumed at first. And maybe she was trying to describe something more complicated and didn't have the language to explain it clearly. Or maybe her providers understood exactly what she meant, and maybe they didn't. And some of you may question whether everything Lindsay reported was truthful in the first place. That's also a legitimate credibility question. Language alone can't answer that, unfortunately. But what we can do is look at the words she used, the questions her providers asked, the answers they received, and what may or may not have been communicated. So tonight, I'm not trying to answer, was Lindsay Clancy psychotic? And I'm not trying to determine whether she was legally responsible or legally insane. Those are medical and legal questions for qualified experts and ultimately the court to decide. My question is much more narrow. What did Lindsay mean when she said intrusive thoughts? And what did her providers understand her to mean? And could they have been using the same words while talking about different experiences? And one other thing before we begin. I know this case brings out very strong opinions. You do not have to agree with me, and you do not have to agree with each other. You may believe Lindsay was psychotic, and you may believe she was totally sane and planned the entire thing. Or it was like a last-minute thought that she might have done it on, and murdered the children, cold blood. You may believe she was fully responsible, in other words, and you may believe severe mental illness profoundly affected her responsibility. And you may question her credibility entirely. All of those viewpoints can be discussed here freely. What we are not going to do, though, is attack one another for interpreting the evidence differently. This has never been a problem in this community. Everybody can disagree as long as it's respectful to each other and there's no personal attacks and no fighting back and forth. Two things can be true at the same time, and I've always believed that. We can acknowledge the horror of what happened to Cora, Dawson, and Callan while still examining the psychiatric evidence surrounding their mother. So I'm not asking anybody to pick a team tonight or any night, really. I'm asking us to listen closely to the testimony and ask a very basic communication question. Did they actually understand each other? Speaking of Lindsay and especially the nurse practitioner she worked with. And because this case involves the deaths of 3 young children, suicide, severe mental illness, and disturbing psychiatric testimony, please consider this to be your content warning and trigger warning. I won't be going into graphic detail about what happened that night, but some of what we discuss may still be difficult to hear. With that said, let's listen to Rebecca Jollotta describe her training and background. We need to understand the clinical lens through which she was hearing Lindsay's words. Let's see. Rebecca Jollotta was one of the psychiatric nurse practitioners treating Lindsay Clancy. So I want you to hear a little bit about her training because it matters to the discussion we're about to have.
And working in women's mental health specifically. And at that point, I was getting training to become, more specialized in it. And when a job opportunity became available, I applied for it.
And what kind of training is that you were doing to be more specialized in women's health?
So Postpartum Support International is the certifying body. Took a examination and passed the examination.
And so are you certified by the Postpartum Support International?
I am.
So keep that in mind. So this is not a layperson hearing Lindsay say intrusive thoughts. Jollotta is a psychiatric nurse practitioner who specifically pursued additional training in women's and perinatal mental health and became certified through Postpartum Support International. So I think it is reasonable to expect that she was familiar with the clinical meanings of psychiatric terminology, including the distinction between intrusive thoughts and psychotic symptoms. And that distinction matters. Clinically, intrusive thoughts are generally understood as unwanted, distressing thoughts, images, or impulses. In postpartum OCD research, these thoughts can even involve frightening images of harm to a baby without representing something the mother actually wants to do. One large perinatal research project described obsessions as recurrent, unwanted, and distressing thoughts, images, or impulses, and emphasized that unwanted postpartum harm thoughts do not necessarily reflect a mother's wishes or intentions. So that is one framework a trained provider may hear when a postpartum patient says, "I'm having intrusive thoughts." But now, let's listen to the prosecutor's reading of how Lindsay herself used those words.
First at 12:20 p.m., we have a message from Lindsay Clancy. "Hi, Rebecca. I really don't like the way I feel on the Remeron, and I know that I can't stick with it, or I can't stick with taking it. I started having very intrusive thoughts that I never had before. I didn't take it last night. I would really like to go back to Julie's original plan of Prozac in the morning and using Ativan and Benadryl at night as a Band-Aid until I get to a therapeutic level of Prozac. Please let me know if you agree with this plan. I know that I need to give it a good couple of weeks to work." Is that the message that you first received on December 1st?
So those are Lindsay's own words that the prosecutor read, written at the time. She said, "I started having very intrusive thoughts that I never had before." She tells Jollotta these thoughts are new. She connects them with how she is feeling after starting Remeron. And she is concerned enough that she stops taking the medication and contacts her provider. So now the phrase exists between them, intrusive thoughts. The question becomes, in my mind, what does Jollotta understand Lindsay to be describing? So listen closely to the clip. Let me see here. Yeah, I'm going to play this clip. Hold on one second. Listen closely to this clip.
I sent her a detailed message of signs and symptoms of postpartum depression and anxiety, including factors like onset, risk factors, predictors, common symptoms, and it highlighted how intrusive thoughts are quite common in postpartum depression and anxiety, and I asked her, I'm wondering if that's what's going on here.
So Jollotta says she sent Lindsay information about postpartum depression and anxiety and explained that intrusive thoughts are quite common in those conditions. Then she says, I'm wondering if that's what's going on here. So that tells us how she appears to be framing Lindsay's report at this point. Not as evidence that Lindsay is necessarily psychotic, not as an auditory hallucination, but as something that may fit into the postpartum depression and anxiety picture she is already treating. And there is another piece of testimony that I'm not going to make you sit through as another clip. Jollotta explained that she gave Lindsay information about symptoms so that Lindsay could understand them, recognize them, and report them back to her. And I think that is worth considering, because now the provider isn't merely receiving Lindsay's vocabulary. She is also helping give Lindsay a vocabulary and framework for understanding what she is experiencing. This was not the last time Lindsay reported intrusive thoughts. The testimony goes on to describe multiple additional messages involving severe or recurring intrusive thoughts. There were so many messages from Lindsay about these thoughts that, to me, the overall pattern reads like mounting distress and urgency. I'm not going to play every single one because we'd be here all night, but I do want you to hear this one.
AM, where she sends you a message saying, "Hi, Rebecca. I took the 15 Remeron and 25 Seroquel. I woke up at 12 with horribly intrusive thoughts of wanting it to be all over. I took 1 milligram Ativan and went back to sleep, and the thoughts went away."
Okay. Again, Lindsay calls them horribly intrusive thoughts. So I read that as really, as it's getting closer, as they go on, it's getting worse is how I read that. And this time she describes them as wanting it to be all over. She takes Ativan and reports that the thoughts went away. Now Jollotta responds again, and this is in this clip.
The intrusive thoughts are part of postpartum depression, anxiety, very painful to think and experience, but I want to reassure you that it's not uncommon and mean nothing about who you are as a mother. Let me know what you think.
So I'm not in the medical field at all. When I first heard, because I didn't know anything about this really, but when I first heard that she's not asking her, and we'll get to that in a minute, she's never saying, well, what exactly are those intrusive thoughts? That would be me. I'd be like, what are those intrusive thoughts you're having? And she doesn't seem to be saying that. So I thought that was interesting. So, but again, in this clip, Jollotta puts these experiences into the postpartum depression and anxiety framework. She reassures Lindsay that intrusive thoughts can occur in those disorders and tells her they do not mean anything about who she is as a mother. And I want to stop here because that reassurance itself is not strange, and I did not realize this. Postpartum intrusive thoughts, even terrible intrusive thoughts involving harm, can occur without psychosis and without indicating that a mother intends to harm her child. Research has found that unwanted infant harm thoughts are extremely common among new mothers, and the research specifically warns against assuming that the existence of such thoughts means a mother is going to act on them. So please don't hear me saying intrusive thoughts equal danger. That is not what the research says, but it was, however, very surprising because I did not realize that. So what Jollotta is doing is answering from that framework as like, don't take it as that you're going to harm the child or whatever, or your worth as a mother. So anyway, my question is different. What if the patient and the provider were not using the phrase intrusive thoughts in exactly the same way? So, and this next exchange is one of the reasons I couldn't get past these two words.
As far as her statement about intrusive thoughts, fair to say your response doesn't ask her more specifics about those thoughts, right?
No.
but you reiterate to her, just as you had in the lengthy messages where you provided information, that intrusive thoughts are pretty common.
Correct.
Okay. So, of course, you heard the prosecutor asked whether Jollotta's response asked Lindsay for more specifics about those intrusive thoughts, and Jollotta says no. Instead, she reiterated that intrusive thoughts are common. Again, I'm not saying that proves negligent medical care. That is a medical and legal determination, of course. But I'm looking at one thing, communication. If the provider hears the phrase intrusive thoughts and understands it according to its clinical meaning, but the patient is using those words more loosely to describe frightening experiences inside her own head, how do you discover that difference without getting very specific about what she is actually experiencing? And that brings us to the defense cross-examination. And this is, I believe this is the very last clip, but it's important, I think.
Had in her message
Right.
that she had today, all day, I had horrible intrusive thoughts, deeply depressed. I finally took 0.5 of Ativan at 6 p.m. And the thoughts are gone, is what she told you, right?
Yes.
Did you ever bother to ask? I don't know. I mean, would you ask the patient what the horrible intrusive thoughts were?
I would have, yes.
Did you?
Yes.
What did she say?
She described them as thoughts of not wanting to be here.
That answer fascinates me. As you heard, on cross-examination, the defense asked Jollotta whether she had asked Lindsay what the intrusive thoughts were actually about. Jollotta said Lindsay described them as not wanting to be here anymore. She then followed up by asking whether Lindsay had a self-harm plan. I don't know about YouTube. I'm afraid of YouTube sometimes. Whether she had a self-harm plan or intent. So at this point, Jollotta did ask about the content, and the answer she remembers was self-harm in nature. But here is where I want to separate what we know from what we can only wonder about. We know Lindsay described the thoughts in self-harm terms. What we do not know is whether that description captured the full experience she was having, or only the parts she could identify and put into words. And this next part is speculation. We do not know that Lindsay withheld anything from Jollotta. We do not know that her pre-January intrusive thoughts involved her children. And we cannot take what happened later and simply insert it backward into every earlier conversation. But is it possible that self-harm, suicide, was the part she could say, was the only part she could say? Because there is research suggesting that postpartum mothers can be deeply reluctant to disclose thoughts involving harm to their children. One review discussed women avoiding disclosure because of fear of judgment and separation from their babies. That matters. Because think about the psychological threshold involved. Maybe someone can say, I don't want to be here anymore. And maybe they can say, I'm having horrible intrusive thoughts. But saying I'm having thoughts involving my children may feel entirely different. And again, I'm not claiming Lindsay did this. I'm asking whether it is reasonable to recognize that a mother could disclose the suicidal part of a frightening internal experience while still withholding, minimizing, or not fully understanding some other part of it. And now we come to what I think is the most important part of tonight's discussion. What if Lindsay herself did not have the clinical vocabulary to distinguish an intrusive thought from some other internal experience? An intrusive thought, clinically, is generally an unwanted thought, image, or impulse. An auditory hallucination is different. But psychiatric research into auditory verbal hallucinations has examined a phenomenon involving inner speech and self-monitoring. Essentially, internally generated verbal experiences may sometimes be experienced or attributed differently than ordinary inner speech. That does not prove anything about Lindsay. It simply means that the boundary between a thought in my head and a voice I am experiencing may not always feel as obvious to the person experiencing it as it looks in a textbook. And remember, Lindsay was not a psychiatrist. She had been a nurse. She was a nurse, but she was not a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse. She was describing what was happening to her. So imagine that someone asks you, are you having intrusive thoughts? And there are frightening words, images, ideas, or internal experiences happening inside your mind. Would you necessarily stop and say, no, technically, this isn't an intrusive cognition. This has perceptual qualities that may qualify as an auditory hallucination? Probably not. You might simply say, yes, I'm having intrusive thoughts. It does seem simpler. And also, I would think anything in my mind is an intrusive thought, just saying. Thoughts come to me all the time, just out of the blue. And now we have two people using exactly the same words, but possibly not speaking the same language. This issue matters even more because Lindsay Clancy has filed a medical malpractice lawsuit against a number of medical providers, and Patrick Clancy, her ex-husband, has separately filed a wrongful death lawsuit against providers involved in her care. The lawsuits remain allegations. And they are not findings of fact. So I'm going to read just a bit about this. I want to read a little bit from Lindsay Clancy's civil lawsuit, because this is where the question we've been asking tonight becomes especially important. And I want to be very clear, too. These are allegations in a civil complaint. They are not findings of fact. So the complaint alleges that after Lindsay began taking Seroquel, she developed self-harm ideation and began experiencing what she herself described as intrusive thoughts. But the lawsuit goes further. It alleges that those intrusive thoughts were actually auditory hallucinations. In paragraph 33, the complaint states that Lindsay began experiencing what she described as intrusive thoughts, which of course were the actual auditory hallucinations. And according to the complaint, one of the things the voice was saying was, according to Lindsay, quote, I will not be the same. I want to die, end quote. Now, stop there for a second, because that is almost exactly the communication question we've been asking throughout this live. Lindsay apparently used the words intrusive thoughts. Her provider appears to have understood those words within a postpartum depression and anxiety framework. But Lindsay's lawsuit now alleges that at least some of what she was experiencing were actually auditory hallucinations. Now, that does not prove the lawsuit's allegation is correct, but it does tell us that this distinction is not something we invented for this live. It is actually part of Lindsay's legal theory. And according to the complaint, the alleged content became more severe. By December 15th, the complaint alleges that Lindsay was experiencing auditory hallucinations throughout the day, telling her things such as, you will never be me again, and you are damaged, and the only option is to die. The complaint also alleges that Lindsay told Patrick, I have thoughts of harming the kids. And it alleges that she was experiencing paranoid delusions, that people could hear her thoughts, and that she could be hospitalized and have her children taken away. And remember what we just discussed about disclosure. If that allegation is true, Lindsay was allegedly frightened, not only by the content of what was happening in her mind, but by what might happen if other people knew about it. And again, I'm not saying that proves she deliberately withheld this information from Jollotta, but I am saying it gives us another reason to ask whether the phrase intrusive thoughts captured everything Lindsay was experiencing. Then, according to the complaint, by January 16th, the alleged hallucinations included, these are the words, it included, you should harm the children and you should kill yourself. And on January 24th, the complaint alleges that the voice escalated into what it describes as a command auditory hallucination that said, quote, this is your last chance. Kill the children so you can kill yourself. And this is why the earlier references to suicide interest me so much. Again, this is speculation, and I want to label it that way. But if the later alleged psychotic experience connected the deaths of the children with Lindsay's own suicide or suicide attempt, then it is at least reasonable to ask whether suicide may have represented one part of a much more complicated internal experience. We cannot assume that, but we can ask the question. Now, here is the part of the complaint that stopped me. The lawsuit describes the opinion of Dr. Margaret Spinelli, a psychiatrist who conducted a forensic psychiatric evaluation of Lindsay. According to the complaint, Dr. Spinelli concluded no one ever asked her to describe the content of her intrusive thoughts, which were, in fact, hallucinations. So, no, which is, we know that she did say, it was the one Jollotta had, we know that she said that she talked about self-harm, but really it sounds like she never went into depth in asking Lindsay about what exactly were those thoughts. So and there it is. That is essentially the question we have been asking tonight. What did Lindsay mean when she said intrusive thoughts? What did her provider understand those words to mean? And were they actually talking about the same thing? Now, we do, of course, have to add an important qualification here. From the trial testimony we just heard, Jollotta did say that she asked Lindsay about the nature of at least some of those thoughts. And Lindsay described not wanting to be here anymore. Jollotta then assessed her for, self-harm plan and intent. And so I would not take Dr. Spinelli's statement to mean literally that no provider ever asked Lindsay anything whatsoever about the thoughts. What I think matters for our discussion is the larger question. Was the actual phenomenology of those experiences ever explored deeply enough to distinguish an intrusive thought from an hallucination? Was Lindsay asked not merely, are you suicidal, but questions such as, what exactly are you experiencing? Are these words in your own internal voice? Does it feel as though another voice is speaking to you? Does the voice feel like it is coming from you or from someone else? Do you believe what the voice is telling you? So those are very, very different questions. And the lawsuit makes this allegation explicitly again when it discusses the standard of care. It states the standard of care required defendants to inquire into the content of Lindsay's intrusive thoughts, which were actually auditory hallucinations. Again, that is an allegation in the lawsuit, but it is directly relevant to what we are examining tonight. Because if Lindsay believed she was describing thoughts, while a clinician understood her to be describing ordinary intrusive thoughts associated with postpartum depression or anxiety, then it is at least possible that both people were using the same phrase while describing very different phenomena. And that brings us right back to our central question. When Lindsay Clancy said intrusive thoughts, what did she actually mean? And there is one more piece from Jollotta's own cross-examination worth mentioning. She testified that she had treated approximately 5 patients with postpartum psychosis. The defense asked whether those patients experienced voices. She said not all of them did, but some did. She agreed that hearing voices would be an auditory hallucination. The significance of that is simply this. Jollotta was familiar with postpartum psychosis and acknowledged that auditory hallucinations can occur in it. But based on her testimony, she did not believe Lindsay was exhibiting psychosis during the period she treated her. So again, how much of that assessment depended on what Lindsay communicated and what Jollotta understood Lindsay's words to mean. And that brings me back to where we started. Two people can speak the same language and still misunderstand each other. Not because either one is lying and not because either one is stupid or that anybody did anything wrong. Sometimes the problem is simply that one phrase carries two different meanings in two different minds. And in most conversations, that might mean somebody gets the wrong dinner order. But here, if there was a misunderstanding, the stakes could not have been higher. So tonight, I am not asking you, was Lindsay Clancy definitely psychotic when she was sending these messages? Because I don't know the answer. Or did Rebecca Jollotta commit malpractice? And I don't know that either. I'm asking something much more narrow. When Lindsay Clancy repeatedly said intrusive thoughts, did Lindsay Clancy and her psychiatric provider actually understand those two words in the same way? Because after listening to this testimony, I cannot get past that question. And I can't get past those two words, intrusive thoughts. What did Lindsay mean? So let me ask you guys, what do you think she might have meant? I mean, you can say if you think that she made it all up, feel free to say that, whatever comes to mind. But what do you think? Because we do know that postpartum psychosis is real, and it's also actually not as rare as what people think. I think it's 1 in 1,000, 1 to 2 in 1,000 births, something like that, about as common as maybe Down syndrome, which is not common, but not really rare either. So, yeah, exactly. Great point. She said one of them should have been trained to understand it. Absolutely. It should have been the provider, I would think. Great point. And go over here. I'm just looking at the comments. Oh, Jay Bowman, thank you so much for the 30 joules. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And also the 10 joules. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Love knows no words. She says, I had postpartum anxiety with intrusive thoughts early on. I never had thoughts of hurting my baby, but he was so fragile, and I was worried that he could get hurt in so many ways. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. That would be a huge concern, I would think. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just reading the comments here. Oh, great point. Thank you. Love knows no words. She says, my therapist absolutely asked me if I was having thoughts of harming my baby when I told her the fears and thoughts I had about him getting hurt. I worried that most moms would be terrified and ashamed. Exactly. And I would think that would keep most moms from, they would not want to tell, because they would be afraid that CPS would come in and they'd lose their babies and all kinds of things would happen so there is kind of a price, unfortunately, to really being honest about something like that. Absolutely. Hi, Peachtree Dishes said hi to me. Sorry, I was doing my presentation at the time. I didn't see you come in. Oh, for the typo, no worries. No worries at all. Hi, Wendy Williams enters a chat. My member, Wendy Williams, also, Love Knows No Words, is a member. Thank you guys very much. And to all my members, shout out. And to all my subs too, shout out. And Jay Bowman, who was here really early and entertaining himself. I don't know. What were you say, Jay Bowman, like 15 minutes till or something, because he wanted to make sure you didn't be late or didn't miss it. Let's see. Just reading here. Yeah, exactly. Haneke says, they gaslit her so hard. How can anyone pretend intrusive thoughts doesn't equal danger? That's the first sign of danger, but it's common and dismissible. So we like to pretend, reassure the mother. And, I'm not like, I don't want this to come out wrong, but it does seem to me that a lot of times when women go to the doctor and even a female doctor, and they're reporting an issue, it's almost like it's not taken as seriously, in my opinion, as if a man, and I'm not like a woman's lib or anything like that. I don't mean to come out that way, but I have noticed a difference. With women, I think it tends to be, oh, it's all in your head, So it's a little anxiety, but it could be like a heart attack or something, because women do have heart attacks too. So absolutely. Wendy Williams, I'll be at the stove, but I'm listening. What are you having for dinner? What are you cooking, Wendy Williams? Because I'm getting hungry now. No, I did eat a little bit earlier. Yeah, exactly. Love knows no words. She says, people who want to self-harm know they will be involuntarily admitted if they admit to a plan. I would guess that most would claim they don't have a plan, especially for the reasons you mentioned. Absolutely. I got to tell you, I would never, because I do know that they, if you do, psychologists, therapists are bound to report it and to take the necessary steps. And I'd be like, I don't want to be locked up someplace. Don't put me in a whatever the state laws are, 72-hour hold or something like that. It's like, no, don't lock me up. I would not tell. And I think most people know that too, unless you were so, I mean, we probably should if you had thoughts of harming yourself and thought you were going to go through with it. But there are some things that you have to think about when you do that as well. And Deborah says she is guilty, prison. Okay. So Deborah, I'm interested. Do you think that she didn't have postpartum psychosis and made the entire thing up? I'm just curious. Oh yeah. And love knows no words. Yep, absolutely. She already admitted guilt. The question is whether she was experiencing psychosis when this tragedy occurred. Great point. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Love knows no words. I think she was afraid to tell anyone else. She barely told her close friends what was going on. And from what I understand too, I don't know, and admittedly, I don't know a lot about the case. I don't even remember when this happened. I don't think I'd ever heard of it until the trial. So I don't know anything about the case. But I would think that everything would be so terrifying to her that she probably wouldn't have told people, because I don't think I would have, and I wouldn't have wanted people to think I was crazy. And I definitely wouldn't have wanted people to think that there was anything to harm my children and things. And I think the baby was Callan only like a few months old or something. So she had a lot on her plate, and she had all the medications she was taking as well. So there's that can do a lot to you as well. Oh, I didn't know that. Love knows no words. She says, Jollotta had residency experience, but she was literally 1 month out of her residency. Oh, maybe that, no shade for her, but maybe that explains why. I mean, people get busy, but for me, I would definitely say, well, what kind of thoughts are those intrusive? What are you thinking about? That's what I would have asked. Like every time if somebody told me I have intrusive thoughts. And I'm not in the mental health field at all, but I would ask that because I'd want to know. So, especially if that was my job. So, yeah, Becky Boo, that's true. She says, I know in the past, not guilty by reason of insanity was pretty hard to win. Yeah. And I know that ultimately Andrea Yates, which is what I was going to do originally, and I'll still do it another time comparing the cases. If you remember, she was found guilty the first time, but then that was overturned because the psychiatrist or psychologist in her first trial had incorrectly talked about some episode of Law and Order of where this woman, found her kids in the bathtub or whatever, and that turned out to not be true. And then in her second trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But her own healthcare psychologist had said she is the sickest person, like one of the sickest people that she had ever met, psychotic and everything. So she had a long psychiatric history behind her too. And Nikki, great point. What woman hasn't felt gaslit by their doctors? True. I'm guilty. I'm pretty sure research will back it up. Women are not taken seriously when it comes to our health. Absolutely. And I'm just, and I think it's, I don't know why they do that, but I think it's, and I don't even think it matters whether that's a male or female doctor either. But with the male doctors, it could be, anxiety and things, and it's not that serious. It's like, it's serious to me. If I'm feeling it, it's serious to me, and I want to be taken seriously. So, man, yay, Wendy Williams! I'll be there in a while, in a bit. It was terrible. I had I had Wendy's tonight, and I didn't know until recently. After all those many decades, they have something other than chocolate and vanilla Frosties. Now they have all kinds of different flavors and stuff. I got to stop partaking of that because I'm gaining weight again. Oh, please do, Wendy. Wendy Williams says, I really wanted to be here because I was going to share my medication-induced psychosis with y'all. Yes, please do, because I've never, that I know of, never had been in psychosis, but I know it has to be terrifying. Let's see. Yeah, love knows no words. Add Becky. In the Commonwealth, the burden is actually on the prosecution to prove she was not experiencing psychosis. Yeah. And I read that today, I think it was too, love knows no words. So they first have to prove, they have the burden to prove she was not experiencing psychosis. Oh, that's terrible, Jay Bowman. He says, women are definitely not taken seriously by physicians. I know because I have seen them dismiss my wife for years. It's horrible. I'm so sorry. How is your wife, by the way? Is she doing better? How's she feeling? Yeah, you got a point, Becky Boo. She says, I can see it in Andrea Yates, but with Lindsay, I'm just not seeing it the same. And I get that because from what I understand, she didn't have the long psychiatric history of Andrea Yates that Andrea Yates did. It's pretty obvious Andrea was just very, very sick, and you don't see the same. And I don't want this to come out wrong, but Lindsay, to me, of course, I'm only seeing her in the courtroom. She seems very cold, but then I'm thinking, well, how would I feel if I was sitting in the courtroom, being tried? So maybe that's not part of her personality, but maybe I'm just projecting. Exactly, Becky Boo. Yeah, Andrea is able to get out, but she chooses to stay in, which I think is very sad because what is out here for her? She mourns her children to this day because by all accounts, Andrea was a wonderful mother, loved her children. So it's just sad, terrible that happened. Yeah, Wendy Williams, yes, says, yeah, it's crazy to think nobody asked her what she was thinking. As many times as she brought up intrusive thoughts, like this girl would be like, well, let's this is me. Let's have a discussion. What are you thinking? What is going through your head? But nope. And then when she did, it seemed to be like something about not wanting to be here anymore. And in one part of that, it sounded like she just took that in stride, the Jollotta. And it's like, in what world, in what planet does not, when somebody says, I don't want to be here anymore, I would generally interpret that as a danger signal, like, self-harm. And it doesn't seem to have struck her like that, Jollotta. So, but yeah, Becky Boo, yum, sounds good. I had like, it's terrible, like the Oreo cookies, Frosty, chocolate Frosty. Oh my gosh, it was so good. I got to stop eating like that. Stress does that to me all the time because I've been working a lot and stuff there is at work. My supposed to be full-time job, but I'm not mostly working full-time these days. But yeah, then I get stressed and I start eating and stuff. So yeah, the cheap chick says, yeah, sometimes it only takes 1 or 2 doses of a meds to experience a bad reaction. Absolutely. You might not even know. And especially psychotropic drugs can be bad with that. Oh, Becky Boo, yes. She says Andrea even looked mentally ill, and she really did. It's just so sad. Wow, okay. Oh, did you, Jay Bowman? He said, I saw her. Yes, that was recently. I saw her bawling her eyes out in court and they had to take a break. Yeah. So, because they were discussing, I guess the coroner was discussing that. So, about her children, that would be really, really difficult to sit through. So, okay, so Wendy Williams says, so I was diagnosed with bipolar in my early 20s, and then in my 30s, they had put me on stimulants, and I was on mood stabilizers. The psychosis came on slowly and gradually. Oh my gosh. My sister is bipolar. And it takes a while to stabilize that too. Trial and error, at least it was with her. Oh my gosh. So, and Wendy Williams enters the chat. She says it was not boom. There it is. It was like an ominous presence in the room. And I would make up in my mind what this was. A bag of trash by the door, ready to go, with someone in my apartment spying. Oh, that had to have been terrifying, Wendy. Oh my gosh. Apartment spying on me. And she said, and then one night my daughter's toys were watching me, but never did I see or hear anything. Oh my gosh, I'm getting chills just hearing about that. Oh my goodness. Um, and then Wendy Williams says, and then finally, the full-blown episode lasted several hours. I was on the phone with my friend and I could hear her bricks squealing. So when I hung up, she says, I was convinced my 4-year-old daughter, who was at daycare, had died in an accident. I was calling my friend to arrange her transportation on the way home. Oh my goodness. And for the next several hours, I lived that reality. I was beside myself thinking about how I was going to plan a funeral of my child. Oh my gosh, Wendy, I'm so sorry. And then she says, even when I got well and came out of it, it was as real to me as if it had happened. It took me years to get over that feeling of grief. Like what I experienced in Psychosis came out with me. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, Wendy. Oh, she says the end, LOL. I was never bipolar. I'm just ADHD as can be. But I was struggling with substances. So been clean for 13 years and off everything for 13 years. Good for you, Wendy. And I guess it would be better possibly to have ADHD than bipolar. So bipolar can be very trying. You're so welcome, Wendy. Anytime you want to share your story, I love hearing from you guys and what you've been going through. Oh, Doris 79, thank you for the 200 joules. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's so nice. Just looking at the chat. Yeah, Love Knows No Word says, I started lamotrigine for treatment-resistant depression. Makes me very nervous, but I'm finally at a therapeutic dose and it seems to be helping. These meds are scary though. Yes, they absolutely can be. I took Medicaid. Well, I'm on Cymbalta myself, that I've been on for years. I'm not sure that I don't really have depression so much anymore, but I throughout my life, I've had major depression, like clinical depression, along with self-harm ideation. That was many, many years ago. It's not, nobody that's ever been clinically depressed will ever understand that, because it's not just a feeling of being down. It's like everything is hopeless, everything's black, you can't feel anything. And it doesn't, there's no reason for it that you can explain to anybody. So it's sad. And what was it? One of the Judd mother had treatment-resistant depression, and I felt so horrible for her because she had been living in hell for a long, long time. It's just sad. Because she had electroshock treatment and everything, I think. Nothing helped. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cheap Chick. This is my biggest pet peeve. I blamed Rusty, I still do, for a long time about what happened to Andrea, because it's like, how many times could they tell you, the doctors told you that if you had another baby, that she would likely have a serious psychotic episode, and they had another baby. And then he was told not to leave her alone, and yet he went to work, and his mother was supposed to be there in an hour, and Andrea did that to the children in that hour's time. And I think, though, I did a video about it before. He was part of that same cult type thing. He brought Andrea into it. So I think part of their belief was, yes, have as many children as you can, which is nothing wrong with that, of course. But, they were following this cult leader, and Rusty said he got a little bit out of it or whatever. But he didn't dissuade Andrea from writing to this guy who, it was all about being a bad mother, and your children, if you're a bad mother, your children are going to go to hell. And so she was trying to stop them from going to hell. It was horrible. Oh yeah, Wendy Williams. Yes, absolutely. She says, absolutely. I was really shocked that so many people are still way behind on mental health issues and are still judged so harshly. This trial has brought them out for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think people don't really realize, like I had a really serious panic disorder, and mine took the form of I would, they say you have fight, flight, freeze. Those are the three, but there's collapse. And I would go straight from freeze to total collapse. And I couldn't function. I couldn't talk. Like I would slur my words, and I couldn't control I didn't have any coordination when I would have one. And then I would panic, and then it could last for an hour. So I'd be in the middle of the store, and couldn't communicate. I couldn't even write because I didn't have the coordination. That's how bad it was. But suddenly everything all changed. Like, I think I stopped worrying about having them. And so the trigger, when I feel it, it doesn't bother me anymore. Before I panic and put myself into it. So, oh, thanks, Wendy Williams. Yeah, it was scary and I'd had that since I was a child, but it got to be when I was married. My husband passed away a few years ago, but after we got together, for some reason, it just started getting worse and worse and worse to where it reached it was crippling to me for a long time. So can you imagine me not being able to talk? That was the worst part of it. I couldn't talk. Yeah. But I'm still looking at the chat here. And when we talk about mental health issues too, I don't know which is worse. Back in the day, a long, long time ago, they did have mental health hospitals and things like this. And what did they used to be called? Sanatorium, something like that. Asylums, but they weren't very nice places. And now there's very few of those places that you can go to long-term for treatment. Your insurance won't pay and everything, and it's just sad. But you also want to make sure that, some of those places really treat their patients really badly. So we have to, I wouldn't want to go in a place like that, I know, and be locked up. That would be like being in prison, I would think. I'm just reading the chat here. Yeah, Nikki, absolutely. Having mental health issues is hard to admit and difficult to explain. The fear of a bad response is valid. Absolutely. And depending on what, the mental health challenge is, people get scared of it. It's like, look, I'm not violent, I just, when it comes to depression, depression is the worst. It's like a very deep pit, you just don't want to do anything, don't want to go anyplace. My dog used to follow me around because she knew that I wasn't feeling good. She knew that something was wrong. And then it was just so sweet. She'd come up and, cuddle up to me and stuff. Dogs are so intelligent. All animals are, dogs and cats. Cats are kind of more standoffish a lot, but dogs will come up and like, are you okay? Yeah, Jay Bowman, you said your wife is doing better then? You said he says she had a rough night last night because electric went out. So sorry to hear that. She's better today. That's great. That would be terrible for her to be going, you guys to be going through all that. And then the electricity went out for an unknown reason because you said there were no storms last night. So, gosh, I love this community. You guys are great. I'm just looking here. Yeah, exactly. Love knows no words. She says, I think Nurse Jollotta was in her first month out of residency. I think she did her best to help, but just didn't recognize the urgency of the situation. So tragic. I agree. And I think a lot of people in their day to day job, whether it's that or anything else, you just get busy and you're not really paying attention to certain things, to certain cues that maybe she should have paid attention to. So, oh, great point. Love knows no words. She said, I think they overestimated her ability to understand what she was going through because she was a labor and delivery nurse. Absolutely. They probably thought she knew all about it and everything. And she did seem, from what I've seen, she was very precise on her medications and things. So she seemed like she was really analytical, like you'd expect a nurse to be, record everything. But that doesn't always translate into you being able to really know what's going on with your own mental health either. So, great question, Jay Bowman. Wasn't she a nurse? Yes, she did. I would think that she would know medical vocabulary, but I could be wrong. I would think so, but then I wonder if she really knew what intrusive thoughts meant clinically, if you're talking to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, what that would mean. To me, intrusive thoughts wouldn't necessarily, if I was thinking about it, it wouldn't necessarily be like a thought in my brain. I would think anything that crossed, whether it was, well, we're all thinking all the time. We don't really realize how thoughts are always going through our minds, but I would kind of think anything, whether it would be like a picture in my head or something, that would, to me, that would be a thought. And thank God I've never heard, that I know of, I've never had an auditory hallucination, just hearing things. But yeah, that would be scary. And gosh, I'm so sorry you went through that too, Wendy Williams. So that to have episodes of psychosis like that. Okay. Love knows no words. Yeah. I didn't think of that. She says, I have a chronic illness and always bring my husband with me to doctor's appointments when I can. Definitely get treated differently. I believe it. And that is really sad, really, because that really speaks to the way I think women a lot of the time they're not treated with, I don't want to, not disrespect, but it's just like you're not that important. A lot of people today in the medical profession aren't, like doctors are so busy. You're on a conveyor belt. You're lucky if they spend 10 minutes with you. So, well, you guys. Oh yeah, Jay Bowman. He said, I've been binging ice cream a lot as well here lately because it's so hot where you're at. Look, like I said, I'm in Ohio. It was, I think it was 90 degrees today, or high 80s. That is unusual. Now this is August. It's the hottest time of the year in Ohio, but we usually don't get temperatures like that, not often. So okay, what do you guys think? You want us to call it an evening? We can all get about our weekend and say yes and enjoy the rest of the weekend. So I think Jay Bowman, thank you. I don't know if that was new, but that wasn't that long ago. I'm sorry if it was. I missed it. Thank you so much for the 10 jewels. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm still getting used to this because it just took me tonight to realize how many people were watching at one time. I was looking in the wrong space. I was looking over here and it's actually at the top of the screen. It's like, oh, there it was. I thought it was someplace. But anyway. Oh, great point. Wendy Williams says, I wonder if Lindsay had little flashes of reality shift. It's called the prodromal phase, I believe. She probably didn't recognize it at first, but unfortunately, her big episode is probably the event. Yeah, unfortunately. Great point. Oh, and Wendy Williams also says, I think maybe because Lindsay was repeatedly contacting these doctors over such minor issues, did they just brush her off as that patient, probably at best. And then they go, I know it sounds like I'm just, hitting, just saying bad things because they're men, but it really does seem like a lot of times is like, this is just anxiety or this is just whatever. And they don't take any of that as a really serious thing. I knew my late husband's mother, I think, had 4 heart attacks and it was never diagnosed. It were minor heart attacks. Well, that was though back in the day when they didn't think women could have heart attacks, but they just brushed it off. It's like, oh my gosh, Yes, love knows no words. She says, especially if you're an emotional person. Yes, like I am. I cry over things. I cry over everything, really. My first response usually is tears, unless I'm really, really mad. But mostly it's tears, even if I'm mad, because I default to that. And and people could look at me like, "What are you crying about?" It's like, I can't. I can't help it. Okay, that's how I'm very emotional. I'm very sensitive. So, yeah. Oh, thank you, Wendy Williams. She said, yes, my dear Stina, you always know how to decode my cluttered thoughts. You said it perfectly. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, love knows no words. And absolutely. She was also being prescribed psych medications from multiple doctors at once, which is crazy. The doctors knew. Psychiatric medications can be terrible. And when you put them all together, it's just horrible what they can do to you. Oh, yeah, love knows no words. I love the lawyer, I think he's great. Yeah. Oh, Wendy Williams. Yeah. She said, I have heard that cats purring is supposed to draw anxiety and negativity from you, but my dogs are my emotional everything. They're just so attuned to every emotion I feel, I guess. Yep, they are. And there's been a lot of studies that dogs and cats, can often ease our anxiety and everything, and our blood pressure and everything. There's just a soothing thing because they're so present. Nothing bothers them. They live in the present, which is what I'm trying to do more often, is just be in the present. Then my mind's going the past, the future. And what does this word mean? He said. So, okay, guys. So I think we'll wrap it up then. I love this community. Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Thank you for my members and for everyone that's given me jewels and everything tonight, flowers. Thank you so much. Anyone, if anyone that you're watching for the first time, if any of this resonated with you, please feel free to subscribe. I also have memberships, and that you can see. You can say join at the bottom and see what those offerings are. I'm thinking of having one for the higher tier because I only have one member that's a higher tier, but I'm trying to think of what that would be, like maybe like a get together where we could just really go into depth on certain cases and things, and see how that would go. So I'm still trying to put that together because things happen really quick. And I was asking Jay Bowman if you saw my Elizabeth Steiner video. Oh my gosh. Like I had just come up with that idea about what if you saw that video, what I was seeing in that filing by her attorney, and I put it together in like 15 minutes, but it took longer for me to get it together and publish it. It's over 32,000 views so far. And the most views I'd ever had prior to that was like 22,000. And that took a while to build up. And this has just been in a few days. I'm going, holy moly, what is going on? I'm not sad, let me tell you that. But I have had some interesting, mostly people are thinking are kind because they're thinking the same thing about Elizabeth. But there are some not too happy people about that. But that's what it is. I mean, we all have our different opinions and everything. But I do believe, this off the subject, but I do believe Elizabeth is a victim. She got married at 15, and pregnant, and all that happened. And I do believe she's a victim. That doesn't erase anything that happened to the children or anything like that. But I just think that to have, 16 children, and she had a few sets of twins and then conjoined twins or something. That's horrible. Anyway, on that bright note, I will say I will let you guys go. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and it'll go way too fast because weekends usually do. But I will talk to you soon. In fact, I think I'm going to have a live on Sunday. I'm putting that together on the Elizabeth. Again, I'm going to have a live on that. So I'll be posting the announcement for that soon. So it'll be like late afternoon, probably on Sunday. I was going to do it tomorrow, but that's back to back like that. It'd be too exhausting for me, I think. So anyway, you guys have a nice rest of your evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. And like I said, have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.